And when the sun hits it, it turns red. And so it's just such a beautiful, visible marker of the organism's defense system turning on.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff. What's up, everyone? Well, it's just me today, and I don't have my trusty partner Hadar with me. He's probably off eating some scrumptious food. As you all know, he's like totally addicted to that. Now, speaking of supplements, one of the things that comes up a lot is how do we approach sun protection? And this is a really big topic. I mean, a lot of us know that sunscreens are very important, but there's been a lot of conversation around how do you do oral supplements for sunscreen? And a lot of people sometimes scratch their head and say, wait, how does that work? Well, the good news is today we are doing a podcast with an expert that's going to just take us through this whole concept. And it's a really important one. Sometimes you can overlook this and miss out on all these gains that you can get in terms of protecting your skin. So we've got Dr. Noreen Galaria, and she is a board-certified dermatologist, and she's been practicing for over 2 decades, and she's got offices outside of the DC area. But what's really exciting today is she's going to be talking to us. And Noreen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Noreen, maybe we'll start from the beginning here, just to give us a little background. Tell us a little bit about what got you interested, and you're clearly practicing in dermatology, but what got you interested in this space of oral supplementation, especially as it pertains to sun protection?
Yeah. So it was decades ago, but I had just finished doing a laser and cosmetic fellowship, and I was practicing at the University of Utah. And so I was an assistant professor there, and my patients were coming in, and in general, they were interested in kind of enhancing their treatment with natural ingredients. But one of the things that people don't realize about Utah is Utah actually has the number one is like the highest rate of skin cancer in America. And so a lot of the patients that I was seeing were young and they were doing everything that we were telling them to do. They were wearing sunscreen, they were wearing sun shirts, hats, and they were still coming in, skin check after skin check with precancers and skin cancers, and they were really frustrated. And so I was just getting a lot of questions about, hey, Dr. Galaria, what else can I do? Is there anything else I can eat? Is there anything else I can take? And really, that frustration, on the side of my patients is what really caused me to kind of do this deep dive and look at what foods or what supplements could really be helpful at enhancing their sun protection.
Well, you're pretty interesting background because you've gone through the medical training and obviously gone through residency training and practicing in medicine. But it kind of shows us that you can go one step beyond with your medical training because you didn't just do that to see patients clinically, which is, by the way, so important. But you've also kind of taken that into this practical space where you are a CEO and you're a founder. So if you can just give us a tiny bit on your journey there to say, gosh, how did you go from I'm going to be a practicing dermatologist to let me also incorporate my skills into this other arena, and then we're going to jump into this sun protection space. But I think it's so interesting that you've taken your skills and you've moved it in multiple directions.
Thank you. So, I think what was happening really was as I was looking at these ingredients, I started trying to incorporate them into my practice. So I would say, okay, guys, you are going to take, for example, Polypodium, and then I would see, or nicotinamide, or, one of the host of other ingredients that are out there, green tea, for example. And I would ask patients to start taking them. And what started happening was that when they would come in, some patients actually, we could see improvement and some we couldn't. And so we started looking at the supplements that they were taking. And The problem is in America, the FDA doesn't regulate supplements. And so there is a lot of, if I may say, snake oil out there. And so patients were sometimes, I think the most dramatic thing I saw was I was once asking somebody to take an omega 3. And when we tested their capsule, it was full of canola oil. It actually didn't have
Oh my gosh.
fish oil.
Yeah.
And so, I think what actually ended up happening is, I didn't ever set out to make a supplement for maybe 10 years or 15 years. I was just trying to use the supplements that were out there and enhance my patients' outcomes. And eventually, I was like, oh my God, there is actually nothing that I fully trust. And so I embarked on this journey really because I was trying to make supplements in what I would consider kind of a medical way, right? So as physicians, we want supplements that are made in FDA registered facilities. They're third party verified. We know the sourcing of them. And so eventually, I kind of stumbled into making supplements because there just weren't any for my patients. And I was seeing, and I still to this day see so much skin cancer.
Yeah, no, thanks for taking us through kind of the journey that you've taken. And I know when it comes to supplements, a lot of these facilities have to be following GMP practices, especially when it comes to oral supplements. But gosh, I think
Yes.
the X factor that comes up is, uh, are they sourcing it the way you're hoping to source it? Sometimes it's on the company, sometimes it's on the contract manufacturer that will just find a replacement unless you insist as a company that, hey, I want you to use this source and just use this source. Sometimes they'll replace it if you just say, hey, I just want this ingredient. And so there's so many factors that go into that. So yeah, thanks for raising that point that there are many ways that the industry can have higher quality or lower quality when it comes to this. But let's jump into the actual. Now, you've mentioned a couple ingredients and a couple, I would say, sources of chemicals that, and I shouldn't say chemicals, but they're like, they're sources of supplements that people can take. So you mentioned two things. You said polypodium, and you also
Hmm.
mentioned niacinamide, nicotinamide. So can you just give us give us an educational review? What is polypodium and why is it important?
Yeah, and I think, let me just take one step back and just even say, I think the one thing we have to start with is the fact that um, the number one thing that we want to be recommending to patients is sunscreen. But the problem is that patient aversion is kind of a practical, not a theoretical concern because we know that sunscreen is a bit inconvenient. People lack motivation, they forget it, or they just dislike the feel of it. And so I do want to kind of start by saying I don't think that the things I'm talking about replace sunscreen, but I think adjunctive oral photoprotection is really attractive. It's easy, it's safe, and it kind of addresses the predictable gap between ideal behavior and actual behavior. And I think one of the easiest things to take is polypodium. And the reason I say that is because it is a fern. And so we're not worried about, kind of as you were saying, like a chemical, for example. And we know Polypodium leucotomas is it's a fern that classically was studied in Central and South America. And what would happen is that this fern grows very close to the equator, and so over eons, it's had to actually adapt itself to protect itself from UV light. And we know that, tribes that used to live there used to actually pick the leaves and brew them as a tea. And they would drink them for certain things. If they were going to be out in the sun, if they had, for example, PMLE or other light sensitive disorders. And so there was a lot of proof of concept even before we started studying polypodium to kind of hint at the fact that it was going to work as a bit of a photoprotectant. And, I think the thing is that what's really important to realize about polypodium is that when we're looking at the sun does three things that we're really trying to prevent in the skin. The first is it causes sunburn. The second is it causes photoaging. And the third is, of course, it can cause cancer. And the beauty of polypodium is that it has properties that can improve protection against all three of these things. And so I think that's why, when you look at it as an antioxidant, this high phenolic content actually is really beneficial and more beneficial than other antioxidants that we might talk about. So if I may go back, when it comes to sunburn, the antioxidant phenols can actually stop the free radical damage that cause redness and burns. But also, if you keep taking it, it'll actually make your sunburn go away faster. When it comes to photoaging, it blocks MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases, which will actually slow the breakdown of our collagen, which is, it's what photoaging is all about,
Right.
and actually will stimulate the production of new elastin and a little bit of new collagen. And then when it comes to cancer, it actually does block UV induced immunosuppression. But here, I think it's important to say we have kind of a mix of in vivo and in vitro studies. So the evidence is not as proven. And I think the data is better for AKs than it is for cancer, which is why I think some of the other things we'll talk about, are really great, as an adjunct to polypodium.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through a little background there too. And it just goes to show a lot of traditional medicine can sometimes be the initial inspiration for any sort of further development, just like you were mentioning, they're brewing it as a tea. I mean, obviously they figured something out over hundreds of years or thousands of years, who knows, right? So
Yes.
I think that's quite fascinating. Yeah, and just to kind of add to the sunscreen conversation, yeah, I think our patients are in earnest, yeah, need to use sunscreen. It's really important. I mean, they have many choices now, mineral, chemical. I tend to really focus in on the mineral sunscreens. Doesn't mean that it's the best, but I think it's the best, and I also
Yeah,
think
I do too.
it's got broad range of coverage. But you're absolutely right. There's been studies that have shown that even if you use it in earnest, sometimes we just apply it too thinly because it becomes uncomfortable to apply it too thick. And the coverage doesn't always reach into the long UVA and doesn't reach into visible, and we still get damage on the skin. So like you said, I've also had patients that have struggled with using sunscreen exactly the way they're supposed to, and they still know that although it's very required, sometimes it's not enough. And so I really appreciate this conversation. So now that you're kind of dipping into, and you've kind of now teased us with more to come, you told us a little bit about this fern, which is so cool. But now tell us about, because you mentioned nicotinamide, niacinamide. First of all, if you can give us an overview, what's the difference between niacinamide and nicotinamide, or are they the same thing? And secondly, gosh, this is a vitamin. So what's so special about this vitamin?
So, I think when it comes to polypodium, are we talking about the vitamin polypodium or the vitamin nicotinamide right now?
Nicotinamide, niacinamide. But if
Nicotinamide,
you,
yeah.
if you still
So,
have something to add to polypodium, please go ahead and do that too.
um, no, I mean, I think for polypodium, the only thing to add that I would say would be that, there's a lot of research that has now been done on polypodium as a whole. And I think the beauty is, and by way of disclosure, I do want to say that I have a brand of vitamins called Interglow vitamins. And so some of this research that I mentioned may be from that, but there's also broad research that I'm also mentioning. But, there is good evidence that, for example, the gummy version is especially good when you talk about, this difficulty with adherence, right? We know that men are not as good at wearing sunscreen, and boy, sometimes reapplying on a kid is like an act of God. Like I remember, trying to
That's
get my
true.
kids to reapply when they were on swim team, and it was kind of impossible. And so, excuse me, one of the reasons that we have this gummy format is because what happens is it's difficult to put polypodium into a gummy because it has this bittersweet flavor. And so what happens is it was just really not very palatable. So
Hmm.
uh, there's a specific extract that we use that is able to kind of concentrate the phenolic compounds and then put it into a gummy. And that gummy I just want to mention because I think that for people who have skin cancer and they have young kids and they're struggling, it is nice to know that that gummy can be used in kids over the age of 2. And so that's just the one other thing I think is worth mentioning about polypodium.
Yeah.
Um, and then, when it comes to nicotinamide, niacinamide, so nicotinamide, niacinamide, it is a B vitamin. And those two words are interchangeable. So nicotinamide and niacinamide both mean the same thing. The thing it is a little different from, though, is niacin, which is also a B3. Now, all of these ultimately convert to NAD and NADP, which we know are essential for cellular energy and DNA repair. But the difference is that niacin causes flushing. And so, it's mainly used for cholesterol. And as derms, flushing would be a very non-ideal,
Oh my
side
gosh,
effect.
yeah,
And
so uncomfortable, right, for our patients. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for differentiating the two. If your patients load up on niacin, they may have hot flashes and a real
and
nice flush
flushing,
in the face.
and they're going to be like, this does not work, doc. And so I think it is important to just kind of differentiate that nicotinamide or niacinamide is the form that we use in dermatology because it supports DNA repair, it protects against UV damage, but without that flushing effect. And, there was kind of a landmark human trial that was done with nicotinamide. It was called the On Track trial back in 2015. I think it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And what they found was that taking nicotinamide, 500 milligrams BID, actually reduced the rate of non-melanoma skin cancers by 23%, a quarter, in high-risk patients after a year of taking it. I mean, that's an incredible number. And I think it shocked a lot of dermatologists, which is why I think all of us suddenly were like, oh gosh, even if we were taking Polypodium and we believed in internal sun protection, this was something that we really wanted to add in for our high risk patients. Because, really mechanistically, what nicotinamide is doing is it's really helping to counter UV induced ATP depletion. So, I think that's why it's so interesting, the field of, cancerization and prevention.
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for mentioning the fact that it helps. Basically, what you're talking about is it helps to support the energy production, which is many times very important in repair mechanisms and whatnot. Now, I do have a question because niacinamide, and I'm just going to refer to it as niacinamide. Thanks
Yeah,
for so that I don't have to say both words anymore. Thank you.
right.
So with niacinamide, are there any concerns or any groups of patients where you have to be more careful with it? And can you comment on the liver story? Like, help us clarify. What is the story around liver health with it, or is there one?
Yeah, so I think actually with niacinamide, the greatest concern really is around adverse cardiac effects. And so liver, I think, is not as much of a concern. I think some of the herbals, the turmerics, even biotin, as a B vitamin, I think those have higher liver concerns. But when it comes to nicotinamide, we were really concerned about it for a while with increasing cardiac risk effects. And there was actually, and this study has really helped a lot of people kind of it's helped to put a lot of minds at ease, I think, in the dermatology world. There was a study done in 2025, so just last year, and it was published in JAMA. And it was a study of 13,000 patients. And here I think the N is really important, right? Because if it's a study of 200, it's just not going to give us the same kind of, comfort. But it was a study of 13,000 patients, and they found that, a higher dose of nicotinamide exposure, the way that we're recommending in our high risk cancer patients, was not associated with increased adverse cardiovascular effects. And so I think that that is helpful. Having said that, if I have a child who is 2 years old, am I giving them plain polypodium? I sure am. I'm not adding nicotinamide to people unless they are my high risk patients. And so patients who have precancers, who are, there for Mohs surgery, who have skin cancer, I am definitely adding nicotinamide to them. And there is evidence that if you add it when you're getting your first skin cancer or when you're starting to get precancers, it is dramatically beneficial. I think before that, it's just, high doses of anything make me nervous if I'm just being honest. I think there has to be a reason to supplement that high.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And thanks for clarifying this because, I have patients that will go onto Google and they'll look up things around cardiac, they'll look up things around liver.
Yes.
And usually I have to, discuss with them that not everything you read on Google is true. And we have to make sure it's not coming from a blogger that's just making stuff up. So really appreciate you clarifying some of these points and just making it actually a little bit more ease in our minds when we think about the supplementation. Now, you talked about polypodium. You talked about niacinamide, and is there a dose that you go after with niacinamide? I know some of the studies use particular doses, but how do you dose these? Like, what is your approach?
So I think the doses that we're really looking at are 500 milligrams at a minimum. So I think a lot of times in precancer patients, we're using 500 milligrams once a day. Once they have skin cancer, a lot of times we're using 500 BID. And so I think you know, with this new study kind of making us feel a little better about cardiac risk effects, I think it's a little easier to balance or even justify the BID. I think there was a lot of kind of weighing the risk benefit ratio before that happened. But I think that, and with polypodium, I like the dose 280 milligrams. I think that's a great dose. In children, it's safe. We've used it, for example, in kids who have PMLE, we've used it in, 1,000 milligram doses. So it's safe enough that, my niece once ate a whole bottle of gummies because her dad wasn't watching her, and they're fine. That fern has very few side effects. When it comes to nicotinamide, your body will flush it out. It's not a fat soluble vitamin. So people could, take higher doses of that. But I think, 280 for polypodium, 500 or 500 BID for nicotinamide is really, where I think the majority of us are dosing.
Great. Once a day, it's music to my ears because as it comes
Yeah.
it goes beyond that. And then I want to turn our attention to this whole group of compounds known as carotenoids, which are just naturally derived phytochemicals or marine chemicals, and they're naturally occurring in a lot of marine animals, in fact, and marine algae and whatnot. So, can you take us through what carotenoids are and which ones do you like in particular?
Yeah. So, carotenoids as a family, I think it's important to say are just these fat soluble, and the fat soluble is going to be important in a second. So, they're fat soluble pigments that are found in plants and in algae, and they're really what are giving our foods their, yellow, orange, red color. And I think there's two things that we really have to, focus on here. The first is that they're actually very powerful antioxidants. So they're really good at neutralizing reactive oxygen species. So they protect our cells from UV. But the second is that humans cannot make them. So we have to get them from our diet. And, that I think is also an important point. And I think when we look at it, there's kind of two families. There's the carotenes, which is what like beta carotene falls into. And then there's the xanthophylls, which is what things like astaxanthin, lutein, other antioxidants fall into. And I am, for the skin, very partial to the xanthophil category. And specifically, I'm very partial to astaxanthin. Um, and astaxanthin is made in a little microalgae called H. pluvialis. And I love the background story. I think as a dermatologist, I just love knowing that things are safe, similar to the fern being brewed, by tribes. But I think as a dermatologist, I love the visual story of astaxanthin. So astaxanthin is this microalgae that grows in these shallow water environments, and is often exposed to extreme sunlight because it's growing very high on the water. And I think the beauty of astaxanthin is that over hundreds of years, to survive, they have evolved to produce a pigment, which is astaxanthin, which shields them from UV damage. And what happens is this algae is green, and when the sun hits it, it turns red. And so it's just such a beautiful visible marker of the organism's defense system turning on, which I just love. I love the fact that you can see it was green, the UV hits it, and then it turns red. I think that's so cool. And the reason that that's happening is because when UV light, which is potentially damaging, hits the algae takes those UV rays and absorbs them and then releases them safely as lower energy light at longer wavelengths, which we see as red orange.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the coolest phytochemicals that's out there. So I love that you're talking about this, and especially with the carotenoids in general. I mean, they've looked at this from a longevity perspective now, and
Mm-hmm.
multiple longevity markers when they looked at these epigenetic biological age clocks, like phenogrim, and there's also another one that's the pheno age and the grim age. Both of them actually suggested that one of the hallmarks of having slowed aging is the level of carotenoids in your blood. So there's like so
Yes.
many other factors that go along with this, and it's such a versatile antioxidant in so many ways. And I love that you mentioned that you can't make it on your own. You kind of have to get it through diet. So it just speaks to the fact that diet is so important. Again, in addition to all the other things that you already mentioned. And Noreen, I wanted to add, there's been some new studies that have just come out in the last 5 years showing that our gut microbiome can even further enhance how we absorb astaxanthin, for example. Like if we have more lactobacillus species, and that's something that we're going to be learning more and more about. But now, tell us about. And I want to add, gosh, these carotenoids have so many other benefits too. I mean, they help with
Yes.
the skin hydration. Studies have shown that some of them, like the zeaxanthin and lutein, help with eye health and whatnot. So, was there a reason that you particularly chose astaxanthin, and is there a way that you like to have that dosed as well?
So, astaxanthin, and, I was saying that these are all highly lipophilic. And so the reason that I like it is because I personally love the combo of the three. I love astaxanthin, polypodium, and nicotinamide together. And the reason is that astaxanthin is really great at protecting our cell membrane. So it prevents lipid membrane oxidation and stabilizes our cell membrane. So if you're kind of thinking of how do I give a patient, there's many antioxidants that you can be taking, of course, but if I'm thinking, how do I give a patient an antioxidant that they're likely to take that is not going to be like 50 pills a day? Because if we try to throw in everything, it's just not feasible for a patient. At that point, I say you got to get a whole bunch of the stuff in your diet, and then you got to get the power players in your supplement. Is the way I look at it. And when we're looking at a cell, what we're looking at really is we would ideally love something to protect the cell membrane. So when the UV hits, the UV isn't getting through the cell membrane into the cell. We would, and that is really for us astaxanthin because it's preventing the lipid membrane peroxidation and it's very lipophilic, which the other, two we've talked about are not. And then, if we've got the cell membrane and we know some stuff is getting through, then we want a really heavy hitter polypodium type of antioxidant because we know it's a very broad spectrum radical scavenger. And so, what polypodium does is it's kind of, let's say, working, in the cytoplasm if something gets through the cell membrane, and it's really working at really good, free radical scavenging. And then if we're looking at the nucleus, which is the third major part that we look at, well, that is where niacinamide comes in because niacinamide is enhancing DNA repair and it's reducing UV-induced immunosuppression. So if I look at what's going to protect my cell as a whole, I'm not looking at just adding multiple antioxidants that do the same thing, right? I'm trying to say, let me pick antioxidants that will all work in kind of the major upstream pathways of UV damage and try to take a supplement that hits all three of those. And for me, astaxanthin, polypodium, and nicotinamide really kind of do the job the best.
I love this. This is kind of the epitome of an integrative approach, right? At the end of the day, it's finding synergistic ingredients. I mean, you've got something from the earth, you've got something from the sea, and you've got a great vitamin. So you've kind of and they've all got different mechanistic approaches to how they help the skin. And I also want to emphasize, gosh, I really want to just lean into the fact that you have something that also is lipophilic, something that can go into the skin and sit there for a little longer time, like these xanthophylls, like astaxanthin, paired with these other ingredients that are really great when we're starting to think holistically. So I love this, Noreen. I could be talking to you forever about this stuff. This is like such awesome stuff, such awesome information. Is there anything that people should know about, how to take these? Is there a time of day? Do you need to take it with food when you're supplementing with these, or or can you just dose up right before you're going out to the beach, or do you need to make this a lifestyle choice? Like, what are some of the ways that you actually practically talk about this with your patients?
And I think here it's a bit of a personalized approach per patient, right? But I think the way that I like to talk about it in my practice is um, if I'm talking to somebody who is just looking to improve their sun protection, maybe they have a family history of skin cancer, maybe they get PMLE, or truly, I mean, we don't like to say it, but there's a lot of people who just won't wear sunscreen. So those patients, if they're taking, for example, a polypodium gummy, I say to them, take it 1 hour before going outside. And so for all polypodium products, anyone that you're taking, you should be taking them about 1 hour before you go outside because it takes about that long for it to get to a place where it's actually beneficial to you. And the nice thing about Polypodium, because it is so safe and it has been tested in such high doses, if you're going to be out in the sun for a prolonged amount of time, like it's a beach vacation, for example, take it and repeat every 4 or 5 hours because, that way we know what the half-life is of these ingredients. And so you can very safely say, I'm going to take an hour before I go outside. And, when I come in for lunch, I'm going to dose it again. And you can dose it in anybody, ages 2 and up that way. Now, if patients have skin cancer, then I think, or, maybe they are just a higher risk patient, then those are the patients who are maybe taking this capsule that has the trifecta, so it's got astaxanthin, it's got polypodium, it's got nicotinamide. And those patients, they should just really be taking it daily because all of the evidence in cancer prevention with nicotinamide has been done with daily use over a year. That's where we really see the decrease of 25% in skin cancers, non-melanoma skin cancers. So for those people, I say to them, listen, you got to take this every day. And then at that point, they should still take it an hour before sun exposure. But the sun exposure story becomes less relevant, I find, with somebody who's only taking polypodium for sun protection. With that one does have a little nicotinamide in it, but it's not high dose. Those patients, I think, are often taking it for sun exposure the way the way that they apply sunscreen. But I think for a cancer patient, you were just taking it every day.
Well, thank you, Noreen. What an awesome session. And thanks for also giving us some of the tips that you like to give to your patients because, all the education is great, but we also need to know how to apply it in the clinic. So that's great that you gave us a little bit more insight into that. So now that we've kind of had a chance to talk about all this stuff, people might want to find you. And so can you tell us, how can people find you? And do you have anything special for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So the brand is called Interglow, and so you can find us on the website Interglow Vitamins. It's easy, interglowvitamins.com. And if anybody who's listening wants to try a bottle, we have a code specifically for this podcast, which is Learn Skin 50, and that'll give you 50% off of anything that you want to try, any bottle. So Learn Skin 50 is the code.
Thank you again. And again, that code is LearnSkin50. And that should get you started on your journey of oral sun protection with yourself and with patients. And then, Noreen, thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome. And we hope that everybody starts to realize it truly is inside and out when we're thinking about sun protection, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. But if conversations like this get you all excited, that's exactly what the Integrative Dermatology Symposium is all about.
And I'm all excited about it. The 9th Annual Integrative Dermatology Symposium will once again bring together clinicians, researchers, and educators who are shaping the future of dermatology. And this year, there'll be a focus on precision, regeneration, and whole person skin health. It's happening from August the 20th to the 22nd at the Grand Hyatt Indian Wells in Palm Springs, California.
IDS is where evidence meets application. Through expert-led sessions, real-world case discussions, and meaningful collaboration, or in plain English, IDS is where you get to talk to a whole bunch of people who are equally skin-obsessed.
I'm also equally skin-obsessed. If you want to be a part of the largest community in integrative dermatology, use the code PODCAST15 for 15% off registration at integrativedermatologysymposium.com.
That's integrativedermatologysymposium.com. We can't wait to see you there.